I said, James, with an intro like that, I should be sitting down and standing up talking about Clinton. Oh, wait, no, somebody already did that this week. It is a pleasure to be back in Waukesha County. I want to tell you, though, I got a kick this morning when I was looking at the newspaper before I went out to do one of our interviews at the zoo. I read the headline. I don't know if it was in the Waukesha edition of the Journal-Sentinel, but in the Milwaukee edition, in the Metro section, it said, Walker to tighten budget. And, of course, they put it in Pearl Harbor-sized headlines as though that was a bad thing. It reminded me of the story a little bit further east years ago when I was out on Lake Michigan on the shoreline, and I was all alone, and I was looking out at the beautiful lake, and lo and behold, I looked out into the waves, and there was a guy drowning. And I said, I looked to the right, looked to the left, nobody's around. I said, God, what do I do? Divine intervention, God said, run, so I ran. Ran across the top of the water, reached down and grabbed the guy, picked him up, ran back all the way across to the shoreline. And I said, oh, this is unbelievable, God. This is a miracle. Thank you so much. We saved this guy's life. This is excellent. The only thing that would be better is if there was a reporter from the Journal-Sentinel here. And I looked again to the left, and sure enough, there was a reporter. I said, thank you, God. That was the added touch was just perfect. So I got all excited the next morning. I got up to read the newspaper. I thought, there's no way they can screw up the undeniable truth that I was involved in a miracle, that something good happened. Truth. And so I got up early. Toinette saw me running by to get the paper out of the front door. I grabbed it from the front. I picked it up and read the headline, and it said, Walker can't swim. So I appreciate the fact that we've got some good friends in the media on the radio that counteract everything else we pick up on the newspaper. I said, I don't know about all of you, but the way James started out, I could have just sat here the whole night and just listened to that. But instead, we'll tune in and keep listening as well. And to Don and to everybody involved with tonight's wonderful dinner, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being such a strong presence, not just here in Waukesha County, but such a strong presence in the state of Wisconsin. We appreciate you and what you've done, what you continue to do, and most importantly, what you're going to do between now and November 4th. And then finally, there's all sorts of friends in elected office and otherwise, but I particularly want to single out Paul Ryan. Paul is just such a great champion of not just us here in Wisconsin, but to have such a great leader from Wisconsin for this country, whether it's vice president or hopefully someday House Budget Chairman or whatever else, United States Senate maybe, or something else we could persuade you to. Paul Ryan's just a great leader, and we appreciate it. On one other serious note, Dan Varakis and I today were over at the VA. Dan cleaned up real well from the Harley gear as well, but we were over at the VA with some bikers and some other folks and veterans and members of the military. And that's a wonderful thing, and I want to acknowledge all the folks here who either are or have loved ones in the military or have served in the past. But I particularly want to pass on a good word to you. Earlier this week, it seems like a long time ago, but on Monday morning before I stepped off on my first parade, it dawned on me. I always forget the time change between here and Baghdad. But before I stepped off at Tippecanoe, I reached down in my BlackBerry, pulled it out, and pulled up Mark Gundrum on my call list. And it took me 2 times to get through, but I called Mark, and we got cut off twice. But I just want to pass on greetings from Mark Gundrum and let you know, and I'm sure many of us are already doing this, but every email, every card, every care package has such a tremendous impact to him. Every time I call him, every couple of weeks or so, he'll tell me that either that call or some letter or some message he got when he was really down and out, being away from marrying those, I think 6 kids, as I recall, all under the age of 10, that really makes a difference. So if you don't remember anything else about what I said tonight, make sure you continue to send your love and prayers, not only to Mark, but to Mary and their family, and we really appreciate that. Reince and Paul touched on this a little bit, but some things that are great points are often worth repeating, at least in abbreviated form, to keep you on track here tonight. But after the 2006 election, Paul and I were at a lot of Lincoln Day dinners along the way, and I have a slightly, I don't say different, but an alternative or an additional sense of reaction to what happened in November 2006, because I remember pointing out last year on the Lincoln and Reagan Day circuit that despite what the media said, I don't believe that the Democrats won the elections here or across the country in November 2006. I just don't believe it. People say, well, wait a minute. When they're in the majority, how did that happen? I said, no, I don't believe they won the election. I believe that Republicans, particularly in Washington, with a few exceptions, people like Paul Ryan and Jim Sensenbrenner, who, again, this past week got top of the ranks, not just in Wisconsin, but across the Congress in the American Conservative Union, but with a few exceptions to two who I'm thankful to say not only represent parts of Waukesha, but Milwaukee County as well. Thank you, Paul. But with few exceptions, through the 2006 elections and all the years leading up to that, too many Republicans in Washington forgot that we're the party of Reagan. They came in that way. You know, Newt and Mark and everybody else who was a part of that revolution again in 1994 remembered what it was like, and for years, even through the late 1990s, got it right. But not long after Newt Gingrich left as the Speaker of the House in the early 2000s, we started to see it. The party that came in that was going to clean things up, the party that was going to control spending, started to become the party of the people we thought to replace. And we lost, or more appropriately, they lost in Washington, the faith and trust of the people of this country and of this state in particular. And that's what lost the election in November of 2006. Now, that's a pretty heavy indictment. But the interesting thing about that is, much like the leader who's my hero, I know is Paul's hero, and a lot of others in this room who were inspired to go not just into Republican or conservative politics, but in the public service, that being President Reagan. What I loved about him wasn't just his principles, wasn't his just conservative beliefs. It was his eternal optimism, not in the government, but in the people. And I believe the lesson that we learned out of 2006 was not only that Republicans in Washington lost the election, not Democrats winning it, but also the optimism was that conservative views didn't lose. Because the people who lost the elections either didn't run on or didn't act like conservatives when they were in Washington. When given a choice, my theory was a year ago, voters, when they have a true choice between a real conservative and a true liberal, will always choose the conservative. Now, that was an interesting theory, and a lot of people said, well, you're an optimist. How will that really pan out? Well, I'm here to tell you today that after just about 2 months ago, we've seen here in southeastern Wisconsin and all across the state of Wisconsin, that's more than just a theory, that's a reality. And I'll give you 3 specific examples. In the race for the state Supreme Court, for the first time in 4 decades, the last time a seated incumbent on the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin lost was the guy who wrote the opinion to allow the Milwaukee Braves to go out of the state of Wisconsin. It takes that much to get it out. In those 4 decades, no one else has ever challenged a seated incumbent, and it took a clear choice between a judicial activist, a liberal on the court, and a conservative who said, just like Chief Justice Roberts in Washington, I'm not here to make the rules, I'm here to just call the strikes, balls, and outs. When voters had a clear choice between a conservative and a liberal, the voters chose the conservative. Again, on not just a candidate, but on an issue. An issue that legislators in this audience know very well, the Frankenstein veto. An issue that our current governor, and I say current because I'm hoping he's got about 2, maybe 2.25 years to go on his term, but our current governor used to great excess, not for what vetoes are for. Any of us who studied government in high school or college or anywhere else know that a veto, particularly a line item veto, is to take something out or to drive it down, not to put it somewhere else in the budget where it adds to some other level of funding. When the voters had a choice between saying we're going to stand with Jim Doyle and allow him to continue to mess up our budget, or we're going to take the conservative position, they stood with the conservatives. And it passed overwhelmingly. And just across the New Berlin Wall, just into Milwaukee County, in a race I'm particularly proud of, when voters had a choice, not like it was 4 years ago, when my opponent was someone that Jim Doyle recruited and then quickly abandoned, never heard another word about Jim Doyle and Dave Reamer. Many of you who were involved in helping us out remember that. This time, they recruited Lena Taylor, the vice chair of the state Democrats, a member of the DNC, a superdelegate up until a couple of weeks ago, finally committed, but a superdelegate and a member of the powerful Joint Finance Committee. Someone that Decker and Doyle and Lawton and Feingold and everybody else in the Democratic infrastructure came in to support and do ads for and run appeals for and everything else involved. the person they said was going to make the difference. Didn't just lose. She lost by a greater margin than any of our opponents in the past. Why? Not because I'm a great guy, but because when voters had a choice between a clear conservative viewpoint and a liberal, even in Milwaukee County, the voters said they wanted to stand with the conservative. What that tells me is that optimism is more than just a theory. It's more than just a concept or a white paper out there. That concept is real. That optimism is real. But the lesson to be learned for every candidate in this room and every candidate we support going into the fall elections is be bold and be proud to be a conservative, and you'll win. When you look at the races before us, and Reince touched on these beautifully, you think first and foremost we've got to make sure, at least for the next 2 years, we've got a hold of the majority in the state assembly, and I think we can not only hold it, I think we can grow it. I think we should shoot for at least 55 seats out there. But we got to work hard. We got to make sure that Bill gets reelected by a strong margin. We got to make sure that the two guys and any others who are filling in for Sue's seat don't let that go, and make sure we get that firmed up. And then once we strengthen those parts in Waukesha County, we got to reach out to other parts of the state of Wisconsin and say there's an awful lot of people that got WEAC targets firmly on their forehead, and make sure we support them in every step of the way. Then, and Reince mentioned this as well, thanks to Jim Doyle and his Susan Goodwin, really, retaliation on Russ Decker in the state Senate, Roger Bresky is now on his way to the Railroad Commission. I think Decker's the one that got railroaded, not Bresky. But the reality is Tom Tiffany was going to win that seat anyway, and now we got a real chance to pick that seat up and pull up an upset in either Kenosha or Green Bay, and we got the majority back again. And even if we only pick up that Tiffany seat, we can do it 1-2. We can pick up one of two other seats, either in Racine or here in Waukesha in Milwaukee County. Maybe we need a little nudging to my friend Leah Vukber to say, take on Jim Sullivan, because we can take the state Senate back one way or another. When we think about stepping out a little bit further and giving Paul some more help, certainly we got to make sure that Jim gets through the September primary. He shouldn't have any problems, but you never want to take anything for granted. And we've got a champion in our backyard. We want to make sure in the 5th Congressional District that we do all that we can to get Jim Sensenberger through comfortably so he can go out and help other candidates across the rest of the state. But once that's done, we have no statewide race for governor. We have no statewide race for United States Senate. We need to make sure that while we're helping assembly candidates and we're helping state Senate candidates, if we've got any extra time beyond that for other local candidates, we make a pilgrimage up to Peshtigo or Green Bay or Appleton or somewhere in the 8th Congressional District, because the tightest race in almost all of those in the country, certainly the tightest race in this state, was John Gard versus the absolute embarrassment that is currently serving as the congressman from the 8th Congressional District. We got to get that done. Now is the time. This is the year. John is the candidate. We can make it happen. You've got to help us out. And then finally, and we've each touched on this a little bit, but again, I think this is worth reinforcing. In the presidential race, not only is this going to be the place, there's no way statistically on any map, on any chart, you can become the President of the United States, at least as a Republican, unless you carry Wisconsin. There's just no way it can happen. Ohio used to be a strong bet for us. It's off the table. We have got to win Wisconsin to elect the next president. And for anybody who liked Fred Thompson or Rudy Giuliani or Mitt Romney or anybody else out there, that's not what the election's about anymore. And for anybody who thinks this is second best, and James, I'll speak right to you on this one. The fact of the matter is my hero, Ronald Reagan, stood for 3 core things that I can remember, even though, I hate to say this, but I was in 7th or 8th grade, I think, at the time he was first elected. But I can remember him. I was the only kid who was allowed to, even though my father was a pastor at the Parsons, to have a sign on the front that said, why not an actor for president? We've had a clown the past 4 years. But that's a whole other story. I don't know if the church liked that so much, but maybe I should go back to that priest routine. But no, when I think back to Ronald Reagan, what I loved about him was he knew where he was, he knew where he was going, and he knew how he was going to get there, because he stood for core principles, a strong national defense, limited government, and lower taxes. I mentioned this the other day with Paul when we were at the town hall meeting with John McCain, and I said, when you think of national defense, there's no candidate I know, in fact, there's no national figure I know who is more personally committed to securing the defense of this country, even more than the man I admire who's currently the commander-in-chief. John McCain knew what it took long before it was politically popular to win this war, and he was at the forefront because he's a man who's not only studied it, he's lived it, he is a true American hero, and he's the man I want in charge as our next commander-in-chief. When it comes to limited government, again, I'll put him up there with just about anybody else out there. A lot of us lately have been talking about earmarks, and Paul's been at the forefront of that. That's outstanding. But since 1982, John McCain has served the United States. And finally, on McCain, when it comes to taxes, this is a man who throughout this campaign has said he's committed to extending the tax cuts that this Congress and this President enacted. And for anyone who would doubt that, I'd say whether he's friend or foe, you ask anyone in Washington, on either side of the aisle, there's not one elected official who they can say with greater certainty that when he says something, when he makes a promise to the voters, he will fulfill that. I have every confidence that because John McCain looked us in the eye and said, I will continue to push forward these tax cuts, that that's exactly what our next Commander-in-Chief and President of the United States will do if it is John McCain. Those are three core reasons why we, not just as Republicans, but as conservatives, should work extra hard to make sure John McCain's our man come November 4th of 2008. And finally, because the hour is late, I just want to tell you the last part about why I get so pumped up about this is not just amongst Republicans, not even just amongst conservatives. But when I look at the future of this country, and more specifically when I look at the future of this state, I think we're at a real precipice. When I look at the economy, when I look how we've fallen in the rankings in Forbes magazine for business opportunity, when I look at the job growth and the unemployment rate, particularly in pockets of the state, and I look at the real negative outlook we have in some regards, I get down. But then when I look the other way, and I realize with the right leadership, with the right plan, with the right agenda, with the right team, we're not lacking when it comes to the entrepreneurial spirit. We're not lacking when it comes to the work ethic. We're not lacking when it comes to the people who want to get something done that's positive for this state and for this country. What we're lacking here in Wisconsin is a leader who has more than failed slogans and broken promises when it comes to jobs and putting the state back to work again. What we're lacking is a governor and a leader who's willing to move us forward. And the reason I'm going to work so hard, particularly for these legislative races, is not to just add more R's, not just to get the Senate back in the majority. But when I think about things like Ted Canvass's great plan to fuel venture capital into this economy and get it going again, when I think about the not compromises, but the packages that Gundy's been able to put together and think, what could that be if you had a Senate and a governor who was willing to work on the same track to really not just pursue a Republican or a conservative agenda, but put an agenda together that's right for this state. I think now is a powerful time. People say, well, that's great, you must be out gearing up for 2010, for 2 years from now. I said, I'm not gearing out just to get my name out. I'm not gearing up just to have people talk about me or potentially raise money. I'm gearing up because I want a team of conservative leaders who can join with us to get the job done, because that's really what it's all about. You know, it's not the matter of between who's on the right and who's on the left, but who's going to be the difference between what's right and what's wrong in this state. And we currently have a leader who's taken us down the wrong path. And I believe not just with a new governor, but with a team who's committed to getting the job done, our future couldn't be brighter. We hear a lot about, you were kidding about this before about Barack, but I hear a lot about hope. And you know what? I'm not tired of hearing about hope. But there's a difference. I believe that hope is great, but hope without a plan is just a dream. Making the dream a reality takes a true agenda, the kind of agenda that we're committed to here in this room, and if we put the right team in place, we together can make that dream a reality. Thank you, and God bless you.